kick us off here out of respect for everybody's time. So thanks everyone for joining. My name is Juan Marcano. I have the honor and pleasure of chairing TAPS. And I will go ahead and allow my colleague to introduce herself.
Councilmember Angela Lawson, and I'm the vice chair of the TAPS committee.
Fantastic. And we are waiting on Councilmember Medina still to join us. But we'll go ahead and move into the approval of the June 22nd minutes. I do not have any changes. Councilmember Lawson, do you?
None for me as well.
Fantastic. So those will stand. Oh, I see Councilmember Medina has joined us. Yay. Password issue again, Councilmember? All right. Hopefully one day we can get that figured out. Did you have any changes to the June 22nd meetings, Councilmember Medina? Meeting minutes? No. All right, great. So those will stand approved. I see nothing under consent, so we'll move into general business. 4A, speed data collection and evaluation. I believe Carly will be presenting this one. So Carly, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair Marcano. Give me a second while I share my screen. All right. Hopefully that works for everybody. All right. Good afternoon, Chair Marcano, members of the committee. My name is Carly Campuzano. I'm the traffic manager in the Public Works Department. And today I'm going to be presenting on speed data collection and how we evaluate that data. This was a topic that was specifically requested by Chair Marcano. So it's for informational only. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I think I'm the only item on the agenda, so I think we'll have some time. So just getting right into it, I wanted to give an overview of data collection in general. So there are a lot of different types of data collection that we collect in the traffic engineering group for different purposes. We do have about 80 continuous traffic counters throughout the city at traffic signals. Our newer types of data video detection for traffic signals does collect data, and we have a web-based system where we can see that data, which has been really helpful. In addition to that data, we frequently order data collection services from a few different private companies who operate in the area. And we order data from them for a few different purposes, which I'll go over, and then I'll focus in more on the speed data part of that. So we do have our neighborhood traffic calming program, which I think you're all very familiar with. It's been very popular ever since we opened it in 2019. And Carl just presented more on details about that in the previous meeting, TAPS meeting as well. So we have the neighborhood traffic calming program. We collect speed and volume data for that program very frequently whenever we receive an application. We also collect other types of data. So we frequently collect turning movement count data at intersections, normally in peak hour time periods, as well as volume data over 3-day periods. If we're doing a study for a signal warrant or an always stop warrant, basically a change in traffic conditions, we normally will collect data prior to doing anything like that. We also collect that type of data with turning movement counts before we make signal phasing changes. So to see if a left might be warranted to be a protected arrow or something like that. We collect data for those purposes. And then we also collect pedestrian and bicycle data if we're evaluating a crossing or seeing if a crossing would meet criteria for a different type of treatment or enhancement. So that's just an overview of the different types of data. But again, I'll be focusing in on the speed data, which a lot of that we collect for the traffic calming program. So getting into traffic calming data collection, there are a couple different methods that we can use for data collection. Our most frequently used method for collecting speed data in the city are tube counters. So you've probably seen these tubes around the city when we're collecting this type of data. So these are pneumatic tubes. There are normally 2 tubes stretched across the roadway, and then there's a little box counter on the side of the road that actually collects the data as cars drive over the tubes. It collects the data, and the firm comes, takes it back, and processes the data. So this collects volume data, so the number of vehicles. It collects classification, so the type of vehicles and different truck categories, and then speed data as well. So it collects all these different types of data. We normally leave them out there for 72-hour time periods, so 3 days, normally during the week. Sometimes we'll leave them out there for a full week or a weekend or something different, depending on the nature of the request. So this is the type of data that we collect most frequently for the traffic calming program, and it is an industry standard data collection method. So a lot of different agencies use these tubes. You might see these in other jurisdictions as well. Another type of data collection for speed data that's used throughout the industry is radar data collection. So our radar speed signs that we permanently install do collect speed data, and we can go to the field and download that data if we're doing follow-up studies or if we've received a different request or something like that. So those are collecting data. And then APD has radar signs as well. They have mobile radar trailer units that they use. And so they normally, I think each PAR area has one, is my understanding, and then they will leave it on maybe one direction for 1 week and then another direction the other week. And they're really helpful for us as well because they do share their data with us and give us access to where they store their data. So we do look at that as well sometimes if we're just trying to see if our data is reasonable or if we think we've had an issue or something like that. And then some private count firms also do use radar data collection. If we order it, they will have a radar unit that they will have a person collect data in an unmarked vehicle. So that is an option for data collection, though it's a lot more expensive and time consuming to do it that way. So the tubes are pretty efficient from a cost and resource standpoint. And then as far as data accuracy, which is a question you asked, which is a really good question. As far as tube data is concerned, we found them to be very accurate within about 1 mile per hour of the radar data. I don't think that having the tubes on the road necessarily impacts people's speeds. I think a lot of people don't really even notice that they're there. And the people who do notice them, they know that they're not going to get issued a citation or something like that. So we don't see that as having a big influence on overall driver behavior. But it is good that we get the 3 full days of data collection because that really lets us know what the free flow speed on the roadway is when there's no congestion and things like that. So we did a comparison of radar data and tube data, a pretty extensive one back in the 2018-2019 time period, and it's pretty accurate, especially for local and collector roads. So next, I just wanted to get into a little bit of how we evaluate this data and what the 85th percentile speed means. I know that all of you have heard me say 85th percentile speed and probably other traffic engineers too. Just when we're talking about if criteria is met for different devices or if there's a speeding issue is identified on a certain road. So just as a basic definition, 85th percentile speed is the speed at which 85% of vehicles are traveling at or under. So this represents the speed that most people are going at or under. And if you are looking at a bell curve, so speed data is generally distributed similar to a bell curve. And the 85th percentile represents about 1 standard deviation above the average. And this is getting really kind of specific math bases, so I'll try to take it to the higher level, but it's really the speed that most people are comfortable going. And most people are comfortable going a reasonable speed based on the design and characteristics of the road. So that's part of the reason why we use this metric. Also, just from a safety standpoint, what we're really looking for is uniformity of speeds. We want people to be going about the same speed as each other, which it promotes safer travel. So for example, if you're driving on the freeway, if somebody's going 20, that's not safe because we want everybody to be going around the same speed as each other. It helps for lane changing, to kind of anticipate what other people are doing. And then on arterials or even local or collectors, it really helps pedestrians and other vulnerable users know, how long they need to cross and when to expect a vehicle to come. So uniformity of speed is a really big thing that we're trying to strive for, which is why 85th percentile is generally used. So 85th percentile is not only used for these types of evaluations of speed data, but it's used for all sorts of engineering roadway design criteria. It's cited in a lot of different federal manuals as kind of what we try to design to is the 85th percentile speed. And speed limits are typically set within 5 miles an hour of that speed as well. So next, I just wanted to get into a little bit about what the data that we get back looks like. So this is an example. I pulled this one for Councilmember Lawson. This is Tufts data that we collected recently based on your request. So we pulled our radar sign data, but this was actually just tube data that we set up just to make sure our radar signs were accurate as well. And I know this is a little hard to look at. From a traffic engineering standpoint, we look at it all the time, but looking at it with you all. So you have the direction listed and we have northbound and southbound separate and then the average. And when we get the speed data back from our consulting firms, they normally report speeds within a 5 or 10 mile an hour range. The more granular data is collected and it's in the spreadsheet, but this is kind of just what the breakdown looks like. And so then at the bottom in these tables, what you can see, and I'll try to point over here, is you have the 50th percentile speed, which is the median, and then 85th and 95th. So for Tufts, you can see the 85th was around about 30 miles an hour, posted at 25. So this is what the data that we get back generally looks like, although it does vary from consultant to consultant exactly how they display it. This is just an example of what APD's radar data output typically looks like that we're able to download from their databases. So you can kind of see on this chart that it's shaped a little bit like a bell curve. So you can kind of see that there's a speed that a lot of people are comfortable going, and then there's, you know, always some outliers above and below that. So that's just an overview of how we collect the data and what the data looks like. And next, I want to get into a little bit about how we use that and how we use it in terms of our traffic calming program. I know that's something that you all get asked a lot from members of the public, as do we. So definitely good to go over this. So with our traffic calming program, local and collector roads are eligible for the program. So these are generally roads that have one lane in each direction, and are in more of residential areas in general is where we get these types of applications. So first we always collect data, I should say, going to the beginning. If we receive an application, we send an email to the applicant or a phone call and let them know that we've received it, and we give them general timelines of what to expect and how the process works. Then what we do next is we set up data collection. And the data collection, sometimes we set up right away. Sometimes we'll wait if it's a school-related concern and school's not in session, or weather issues in the winter or something like that. So we set up the data collection. And then when we get the data back, the first thing we look at is what are the speeds? What's the 85th percentile speed? What are the distribution of speeds look like? And how does that compare to the posted speed limit and the characteristics of the road? So generally, if speeds are about 5 miles an hour over the posted speed limit, for the 85th percentile speed, they move further in the process where we continue to evaluate. So another criteria that we use is based on traffic volume. And a traffic volume threshold we normally use is it needs to be at least 500 vehicles per day or more. Because if it's under that, it really means that it's just the very local traffic only, and it's maybe the, you know, smaller number of houses that are directly adjacent, and it's not necessarily what we would consider any cut through traffic or outside traffic, and it's relatively low volume. So just to give you an idea, 500 vehicles per day, that would probably be about 50 vehicles in the peak hour at the busiest, which is still less than a vehicle per minute. So it's not that many vehicles. Whereas on a collector roadway that's busier, we might expect 5,000 to 8,000 per day, or even on a busier local, we would expect a couple thousand per day. So 500 is kind of our lower threshold for considering applications. And so if those two things are met, they move forward in the process, which I'll go over on the next slide. But another criteria that's a little separate from traffic calming is about safety. If they mention a safety concern, we will pull data, the crash data from our APD database and other sources. And if there is a crash pattern that's correctable, that's something that we look at and can use our judgment on if we can correct that with a different project or work order outside of the traffic calming program. So if it's, you know, just a concern about the safety of an intersection, and we notice a pattern and we think it can be fixed with signing and striping or something like that, that's something that we'll move forward with outside of traffic calming. So if they've met those first two criteria, we go through a prioritization process each year with the traffic calming program. So we've been getting about pretty consistently 30 to 40 applications per year to the traffic calming program. It's been very consistent since the program started in 2019. It's been actually a little busier this year, I think. And so if the roadway qualifies, we look at a lot of different criteria to see where it falls on our overall list, and then to see what funding we have for the year. So what that looks like, there's a lot of different criteria. We're all engineers. We make a lot of spreadsheets that we've fine-tuned over time for this. But what we look at is first vulnerable populations. Is it near a school? Is there, you know, are there those kinds of features? Is it an elementary school or a lot of kids walking there? Then we look at location and proximity to pedestrian crossings. Is the roadway on the regional high injury network, which on local and collectors, it's generally not, but that is something that we do look at. We look at what we would do as a mitigation and what is the cost. So on some of our longer collector roads, it might be a more expensive mitigation, and that factors into it because we don't want to use the whole year's funding on one project. What I don't have listed on here, but we do look at what the actual speeds are. So if it's 5 miles an hour over the posted, that's not as severe a speeding issue as if it was 7 or 10 or sometimes higher. So that also factors in. And then another thing we look at is direct home frontage access and driveway access. Because it's a different feeling if people are directly backing out onto the road or if their house fronts the road, or if it's more of a collector situation where there aren't any driveway accesses. And then if a project is really close to meeting thresholds but doesn't quite make the funding allotment for the year, we might tell the person that, hey, you met this criteria, you're not quite meeting the funding requirements, or the prioritization requirements, I should say, for this year, but we'll keep you on the list and we'll reevaluate next year. So for those borderline cases, we do communicate that as well. So that's just a basic overview, and this is just a screenshot of kind of our applications and mitigation citywide, which it's becoming a pretty crowded map. But like I said, Carl went over that more specifically in a previous meeting, so I won't dive into that too much. So that's just the overview, and with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Carly, for that presentation. I have a bunch of questions, but first I'm going to recognize my colleagues. So Councilmember Lawson, do you have any questions or comments?
Yes, so Carly, thank you for providing the slide on Tufts. Just a question for you, a couple on that, and using that as an example for basically some of the citywide ways that we're looking at speed data. So we've had those the radar cameras up there that tells how fast you're going. In the data that you provided, it looks like it's about people are just only going 5 miles over or 6 miles over on that road.
Generally, so that's the 85th percentile speed. So most people are going within that. But what you can see is that in an entire 3-day period, what you can maybe not see, because I made this really tiny, I'll read it to you. So we have speed ranges that are 5 mile an hour increments in this. And so there are always a few outliers. And so on Tufts, over a 3-day period, when this was collected, there were 2 people who were going 50. So that is always going to happen on every road. There are always going to be 5% or so, or a little more, of people that just disregard the laws and are out of compliance. They know they're going too fast. There's all different factors involved in that, but those aren't necessarily the people we want to design to, because they don't really obey anything that we put on the road. Chicanes, roundabouts, it's not going to influence these 2 people in a 3-day period, if that makes sense.
Okay, so my question is, with this data, with this specific example, as it will relate to probably other places where these would go, if the data is like this, will traffic take these down, which I hope they don't?
No, we won't take them down.
There's people that, there are houses that are kind of frontage towards on Tufts this way. It is a major corridor that does hook to Parker Road and Smoky Hill. It does have a school. So I'm just wondering, with that data that you guys did, and just with this specific time frame, and I guess that's going to go to my next question. I remember when you guys had these up, so because I was going on the road. When do you, if you collected data here, when do you collect data again to do like more of another observation? Is it by request, or is it a certain time frame in the policies and procedures of how you do collect this data?
Yeah, that's a good question. In the case of Tufts, there are radar signs out there. So we went and downloaded that data first, and then we collect tube data sometimes just to make sure that our radar sign data is accurate as well. So this data showed that the speeds are kind of within what we would expect. And looking at our other prioritization list, I mean, when a roadway meets criteria for a traffic calming intervention or project, then we allocate funding for something we think will be useful. And so if it's only around 5 or 7 above the posted on this type of road, sometimes what we do is the radar signs, which are already out there. So the radar signs are helpful because they also show people what speeds drivers are going. I know if you're standing on the sidewalk, sometimes it feels like people are going faster than they are, and it's just a good visual indication. So for Tufts, since we already put a device out there and the speeds are only about 5 over, this is probably not one that we would regularly collect data for unless there was a specific request after another few years. So normally we're not regularly recollecting data on roadways if there hasn't been a change in the area or a change in conditions. But if there's a big development that goes in or like a new elementary school, those are the types of things where we would possibly recollect data more quickly.
Okay, and then my last question regarding this is signage. If a camera is actually covered by a tree, and I know it's the HOA's responsibility, but if you're going west and you're going come from Smoky Hill, I mean, you can't even see the sign because first of all, you got people parked, some people parked over there. And then on top of that, there's a tree. So a lot of people are probably going a little bit faster because they know that they see it on the other side, but they're probably going that way because there's a tree coverage. So what do you guys find the HOA for that? Do you will let them know, hey, people can't see this. It's blinded by this big tree that's covering it. So there is an obstacle. There is an obstacle.
Yeah, we do try to locate signs as best we can. We want our solar panels on those signs to be able to gather up sun and keep them working, and we want them to be visible. But there are some areas where there's just a lot of parked cars and a lot of trees and or there's underground utilities to work around, which can make it really tough as well when we're locating those signs. But to answer your question about tree overgrowth, it depends on who owns the tree. If it's private ownership, a lot of times our code enforcement folks will let the person know to trim it. If it's a city tree, we'll let forestry know and they'll trim it. But it's kind of a recurring thing that comes up every spring and summer. But we do use Access Aurora, the website and the app a lot for those types of requests, and they do get trimmed if they're blocking any types of signs. We have that happen at stop signs too. So.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I think that answered my question. Sorry, it was for my particular area, but I think it addressed questions that would be citywide as well. So thank you for addressing those and taking the data from Tufts as an example. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Lawson. Councilmember Medina?
Yes, a couple questions. Did you do take historical data on certain areas? Have you done that, I guess, with the entire city to kind of see, has there been trends of certain residential areas or places where there seems to be more speed at any particular time than there used to be in the past? Do you guys collect that kind of data?
We've been collecting speed data through this program. So we have a lot of data from 2019 and after as far as speed data on local and collector roads. We have done some data recollections and some areas do change. Some of them we see change if there's high impact work zones and maybe there's a little bit more traffic diversion. The pandemic just made things a lot different in a lot of different areas. But I honestly, from a lot of the data that we've recollected pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, the speeds on local streets have not changed that much, I would say. I think what did change in the pandemic was a lot of people were maybe spending time outside and maybe walking more in their neighborhood and during the day. And we're just home working from home or whatever to notice the speeding concerns is what I saw. There are a lot of different traffic pattern changes that have happened over the last few years. But as far as speed data, I feel like it's been relatively consistent, but we don't have a really solid database on local roads before this program, just because we didn't have a program available. But APD has had radar sign data available for a really long time, and so we do look at their data when we get a new request, and sometimes they'll have data from 5 or 10 years ago, and I haven't seen anything that really is significantly different, but it's probably street by street, honestly.
Okay, yeah, because I've been noticing, at least I know it's speed. Definitely people are going a lot on Mississippi from Buckley up to Uravan, that stretch there. I mean, I don't know, 2 or 3 times, luckily I didn't cross on a green because there was people flying by at least 50 or 60 going by and went through red lights, to go through. Had anybody went on the green like they were supposed to, they'd have probably got T-boned on there. And I've seen that numerous times. So, because I drive that getting out every day. So I was just curious about that.
Yeah, I think you're right on arterials though. I think those are a little different. I do feel like the speeds, even throughout the pandemic, I think the distribution of peak hour traffic smoothed out. There used to be like more of a distinct AM peak and a PM peak. And when there was less congestion, I do think people have gone faster and got used to going faster a bit. So I think on arterials, you're definitely right. I think just local and collectors, I don't know that there's been as much of a change, but we don't have comprehensive before after data set. So.
And my last question is, what is your budget for the mitigation and what's the average cost?
So our budget varies from year to year. A lot of it is set, honestly, by you all providing funding through supplementals and annual budget cycles and things like that. I think on average, it's been 500,000 about annually to $1 million. There was one year I think where you all allocated an extra 2 or 2.5 million to the program, which was really helpful in getting some of our projects done and getting our bigger projects done. But yeah, on average, it seems like 500 or so, and with a lot of variation over the last 4 years. And then mitigations, those vary a bit too. One set of speed cushions, if it's 4 cushions side by side, is probably about $20,000. Probably a set of radar signs is maybe $25,000 as well. And if we're doing speed cushions, normally we're doing more than one set. So we're probably looking at, I'd say, at least $50,000 per project. So when we look and see like, okay, we're getting about 30 to 40 applications per year. And on average, an application to mitigate costs 50 to 100,000. That means we can address about a quarter or so of those, and a little less if some of our projects are more expensive, which does happen. So.
All right, that's my questions. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Councilmember Medina. All right, so I've got a bunch of questions here. So I'm going to start with a follow-up to one of Councilmember Lawson's questions. You answered that, like a chicane or a roundabout, or I guess some other kind of built improvement wouldn't necessarily impact habitual speeders. But I'd like to know how that can be true, because if you're going to habitually speed through an area that ends up with, curb or, a fairly large obstruction that you couldn't really take at high speeds in a safe fashion, that's not going to end well for the motorists, and that would be a very hard lesson learned for them. But it would, I think, in one way or another, make that a much less, let's say, attractive behavior there. And part of one of the examples that I thought of was like Lombard Street. In addition to the just ridiculous traffic in San Francisco, like there's no way in heck you can speed through that corridor given the steep grade and the switchbacks there. And chicanes are, granted, this is a bit of an exaggerated example because chicanes aren't quite that dramatic, but they can create a similar effect when they're placed properly. So could you elaborate on your point a little bit there?
Yeah, I think definitely if you're doing anything physical, a physical deflection, that will slow people down more than something like a radar sign, because a lot of people will physically have to slow down, and most people will see that device and they'll choose to slow down. But there will be a small percentage that won't. Sometimes they'll veer around the item, or they'll see how fast they can take it. We've gotten a lot of complaints about motorcycles and ATVs all over the city with enforcement related issues doing different things, or different types of e-bikes, and some people will still find ways to speed. But I'll also say that a lot of the physical deflection items like a roundabout or maybe bulb outs at an intersection, those need to be focused at an intersection so people still can get up to speed in between if they try really hard, which a small percentage of people do. But in general, yes, if you're doing a physical project that will physically deflect people, most of them do slow down. But a lot of our items are designed to slow people down to within 5 or 10 of within 5 of the posted speed limit, really. So if the 85th percentile is already 30, and we put in a roundabout, and if we collected after data, the data on the road, it's still probably going to be 30. So that's kind of more of what I meant, but thanks for the question. I think that was really good to clarify.
Yes, no, thank you for that clarification.
Yeah.
I was going to say, like, wait, are people just jumping? Like, what's going on?
We've seen a lot. I won't get into details, but yeah, it doesn't slow down everyone.
No, for sure. And I've seen people take speed cushions a little too hard, but I think that they learn their lesson after their car bottoms out the first time.
Yeah, I think so. Yep.
So, all right. So starting back from the top then. So I understand, why we use the 85th percentile, but I feel like what we're doing there is still giving, I think from my perspective at least, far too much wiggle room for speeders. And I would like to have us, really use the posted limit or the 50th percentile at least. as our standard, because it's one thing I've noticed with, and it's not just an Aurora issue, so please don't take this like I'm throwing staff under the bus or anything like that. But we seem to design our roads with cars in mind first, as opposed to safety first. And we accommodate speeders when we do that. So I know that we use a lot of highway standards, that kind of bleed into how we basically engineer our residential, our collectors, and our arterials in Aurora. And I was recently turned on to the safe system approach, which is also this is another federal kind of like guideline maybe or standard that has I guess it's more recent at least. That seems to me to be much more safety focused than speed focused and accommodating vehicles over people. So, or people who are not in vehicles, I should say. So can you talk to me a little bit about what considerations we've taken with the safe system approach, if any?
That's a very big question. And I know that I think you requested a specific safety focused presentation at, I think, maybe a ward meeting in the future. So I'll definitely get into a lot of details. But what I do want to say is that the traffic calming program is not a program that is intended to address safety. The safety issues in the city and other cities as well are really not happening on the local and collector streets. The safety issues are happening on the higher speed multi-lane roadways, like arterials. So I'm sure you're aware of that. But so the traffic calming program is really more of like a quality of life, addressing resident concerns and more perceived or feelings of safety rather than what we actually call safety and just in the traffic engineering realm, because really there's hardly any crash patterns, crash frequency on most of the roadways in the traffic calming program. So I think the bigger speeding issues are on those arterials that are wider and people can get up to higher speeds on. So I'll definitely go over that in the future too. But the safe systems approach though comes from a perspective of the people are going to make mistakes and that the punishment for those mistakes shouldn't be a serious and fatal injury, and really designing for all modes rather than the previous approach, which was I think just was more, I guess, more of a reactive approach. So I'll get into more details about that, I think, in the safety focused presentation. But going back to just what we collect speed data for on local and collectors.
You want to go potty, baby?
Someone.
Yeah, it's not me.
Rachel, I think you're unmuted. If you can mute.
Okay. Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's like, is that me? I'm home alone. So just I'll talk a lot more about safety. It's kind of a topic in and of itself, but just going back to the traffic calming on local roads, our local road standards are really not highway standards. We do try to design them for all modes. I think part of the issues though is that a lot of the constituents in all of your wards are in the portions of the city that were built a really long time ago, and they weren't built to our current standards. They were the standards of the time, which were a lot different. So hopefully that sort of answers that.
It does, but I feel like the safe system approach, what I was reading through, kind of like the synopsis of the program. I do feel it does impact residential roads to an extent, right? Because one of the things that they actually call out in that is, we should be using the average speed as opposed to the 85th percentile to really make, traffic calming decisions, which would include neighborhood streets. Because I know I've had some constituents who've been very upset when, the 85th percentile, is just 2 miles an hour over the posted limit or something like that. But they do still have, those folks who treat it like a drag strip. And we just had, weren't there when that was happening. And I can tell you just anecdotally, that happens right outside of where I live, at least weekly, sometimes twice or 3 times a week. Because I have some neighbors who have some muscle cars, at least that's what it sounds like. And they also have dirt bikes, which is really dangerous because they're not licensed. They don't have any lights or anything like that. They like to go out at night and act a fool and wake up half the neighborhood. So in addition to just folks who speed, as I think you probably have heard me say that I was passed coming up Harvard Place towards Blackhawk by someone in a I think it was a Charger or a Challenger that was doing like easily 55, just spitballing because I was doing right at the limit, and they flew by me. and like, tires chirping basically on that curb to get onto Harvard from, I think it's Elkhart in Chatsford. So what I'm trying to, I guess, convey here is that, even though these scenarios might not be particularly common, as you mentioned earlier, the tragedy will eventually strike. And I feel like we should be doing everything we can proactively to re-engineer these areas, including through our traffic program or through our neighborhood traffic calming program to, minimize the chance of this happening at all. Which kind of leads me to another point where, we look at volume on, some of these roads when we, submit requests or when our residents, get together a petition. But that I guess a volume of 500-ish or lower is kind of like a disqualifier. And I understand like how we could use that for prioritization, right? Because obviously if we're having, let's say serious issues on a, 2000, a road that gets 2000 vehicles, right, during peak hours versus 200, like that makes sense to me to start with the 2000, but we shouldn't just throw the 200 out. That should be put into the prioritization queue as well. Because what I would like to see us do eventually, and I think we have some opportunity to start doing this as we're, repaving and resurfacing at least our residential roads, is like reducing travel lane widths, adding, reflector posts and things like that to slow traffic down in our neighborhoods. And that includes speed cushions as well. I know that those annoy some folks, but like you can't really ignore those without some consequence. And I think that those kinds of built improvements, I know that they're more expensive than, signage, well, in some cases, signage. But that's the direction we need to go because it's an issue of the, original design, as you pointed out. It's very out of date and encourages speeding. So what can we do to not disqualify applications just based off of volume of traffic? Let's start with that.
So the volume isn't a hard threshold. It's one of our main criteria along with the speed data, but it's not just a hard line. If you're at 501, you're disqualified type of thing. But honestly, the roads with lower volume tend to also have lower speeds because it's only the people who live there, and you're not zooming through if you're getting to your house 3 houses down. So in general, and we've reviewed 130 or 40 of these applications so far. So we've gotten a pretty good idea, but in general, if you're living right there, you're not trying to race through to maybe avoid going through a signal or avoid an arterial street. So those two metrics coupled together generally mean there isn't as severe of a speeding problem. But we're also already having to cut off applications of saying like, this is the amount of funding we have.
Yeah.
This is where the prioritization is. So, I mean, even if we opened it more and had more people on the list, the funding still wouldn't match the need. And we also don't want speed bumps on every single road throughout the city. I mean, that'll delay emergency responders. That'll probably just make people a lot more frustrated overall. And our speed cushions are designed so that people can go about 25 over them. And so with that, you'll still get the occasional person in a lifted truck or a motorcycle who's going to go 30. So really our speed cushions, if the prevailing speed is already 27 to 30, the before after is not going to be much. Like maybe you're slowing people down in general by 1 mile an hour, but you're spending $100,000. So that I don't know. I just, in general, with the program, what we've learned so far, I don't feel like lowering the threshold would be in our best interest. I feel like it would just lead to different concerns, and really traffic engineering is all about trade-offs. And I feel like we'd be trading a lot and not necessarily getting a whole lot of benefit out of it is just my thought. So.
I appreciate that perspective. I just feel that, oftentimes when we get these, it's usually people concerned about their kids, right? Or their grandkids who, play in the area.
Yeah.
And I don't blame them at all for prioritizing the safety of their kids over, whatever fiscal impact it might have, for providing that service there. And I think that we should err always on the side of safety when it comes to our, traffic engineering. So, yeah, the traffic calming budget is something that I think we need to increase generally anyway on an ongoing basis, just given the increase in, I think, volume of, at least in my experience, volume of complaints for these issues. So I just submitted one yesterday around the school.
I think I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. That one. So I guess I wanted to circle back to a earlier request that I had submitted around crossings, since crossings did come up earlier. And I think that this kind of ties into probably something we will discuss at my next ward meeting, in September around the, safety. But going back to the safe systems approach, we had a Ward 1 resident provide us a list of crossings where she felt that the time was not long enough to allow her, or frankly folks with disabilities, to get across safely. And basically all of them were shot down because it would adversely impact the flow of traffic. And I feel like that's another instance where we're prioritizing vehicles or people in vehicles over people outside of them, and their ability to safely navigate our city. So I know that's a little bit outside of the purview directly of neighborhood traffic calming, which is what we were talking about here, but it did come up, so I just wanted to highlight that. And,
Yeah, and I can touch on that really quickly, because
Yeah.
that answer is a little more complicated than what we wrote in the response. So when we are timing signals, what we look at is we have somebody go out really with a wheel and measure the crossing. And then we use the federally designated walking speed, which is 3.5 feet per second. It actually got slower in the last federal manual update. So that's something that we've updated citywide in 2018. And so then we calculate what the flash don't walk time of the signal needs to be. So the flashing hand time. And so the flash don't walk time should be long enough for the majority of people to cross, really. And I understand that some people will cross slower for different reasons, but on top of that, you also have 5 seconds of walk time. So if they start right away, they have even more time. And then there's also a clearance time at the end of the cycle where there's a couple seconds of, there's a few seconds of yellow, a few seconds of red. So there's even a buffer on top of that. But the issue with just globally increasing the times is that first, it'll throw all of our signals in the city out of being coordinated with each other.
Yeah.
We would get floods of complaints if we just did that. It would have to be a whole citywide retiming effort. And then if we increased all of the times, like let's say with our next citywide effort, we increase all the times, it makes the time that it'll take to serve each phase, including the pedestrians, longer. So instead of having to wait maybe 2 minutes at the most, people could have to wait 2.5 or 3 minutes. And that'll just have a ripple effect with congestion. And then the other factor is just that when people in a car are frustrated and have been sitting too long and they tend to shoot the gaps more, they'll run more red lights, like it'll be worse for safety, even though it's a bit counterintuitive. And then also if we give more walking time than most people need, people in cars will see that that's too much time, it's dead space, and some people will take advantage of it and use that as buffer time to run a red light or shoot a gap right in front of a pedestrian. So I know it feels like just increasing those will improve safety, but it really would not have that impact. And if there are specific areas, if someone calls us and they say, I have a disability, I cross this way, can I get 2 more seconds? We'll look at those and accommodate those on a case-by-case basis. But if somebody just says, I need all 12 arterials to all have more walking time, we can't do that. It would have really bad impacts on all of our signal system, if that makes sense.
No, that does, and thank you for that. I think it's an important part of the conversation, and maybe that's something that we could convey to that resident. I know we kind of touched on it a bit, but I think that a little bit more detail would have been really helpful.
Yep.
Because you can imagine they were pretty upset with.
Yeah, and I can give her a call too.
Yeah.
I think I've called her before about different issues, so I can definitely give her a call and explain that a little better.
Great. And speaking of accommodations, was it your department that also handles audible crosswalks?
Yes, we're putting those in. Yep.
Fantastic. So you got the one on
Yes.
Arizona and Buckley then?
Yes. Yeah, so that one I think was already installed. There were a couple other requests when we called the resident. But yes, I think we have that response prepared and we've already talked to him. So those are in the queue to be installed as well. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then my last question for now.
Mhm.
So I was also reading that Dr. Cog has adopted Vision Zero, but I actually didn't
Mhm.
see where we did. So why is that?
Yeah, the city of Aurora so far, to my knowledge, has not formally adopted Vision Zero. And Cindy might have more to say about this in general, but just as a group, our traffic engineering group has always evaluated crash data. We've applied for a lot of different safety grants. We're building one now that we applied for a few years ago. So safety is really at the forefront of everything we do. But adopting Vision Zero, whether or not to adopt that, is really honestly more of a political like aspirational goal that is set rather than normally being led by maybe a traffic engineer. But also adopting that comes with a lot of different requirements of reporting metrics, and a lot of agencies that have adopted that have specific Vision Zero staff and have dedicated program funding and FTEs, and there's a lot more that goes along with that, I think, than just passing a Vision
A
Zero
resolution.
resolution. So yeah, and Cindy, do you have anything to add? No?
You were
Okay.
spot on, Carly, with
Okay.
what I was gonna say. So, yep.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I have a follow-up on that then, for both of
Yeah.
y'all. What kind of staffing needs would be required? Because, if you measure something, you're more likely to actually address the issue. And I feel like currently we're not measuring these things as well as we could be, so I am interested in pursuing a Vision Zero resolution, but I'd like to know what the fiscal note attached to that might be.
Yeah, and I think honestly, we need a little bit of time to evaluate that. I know Denver has a program set up. We just need a little time to get into the details. I know Denver's had some challenges with theirs. So I think understanding that and how it might impact the fiscal note and any requests we would make is important. So let me get with Laura. She's got good contacts over there, and we'll get with them and kind of get thoughts from them on what it would take.
All right, great. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Okay, and then Carly, to circle back to safe systems. So are you going to incorporate that into the presentation for Ward 4?
Yes, I will.
And I think maybe it might be good to also have the presentation for the committee, unless y'all want to come to my September Ward 4 meeting.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably the same presentation. So if we probably need to look and see what's on the TAPS agenda for the next couple of meetings, but I'm sure we could fit that in somewhere as well.
Okay.
You
great.
get to hear it twice. So
I'm happy to. All right. Thank you. So with that, are there any other questions or comments, y'all?
Carly, I just had, I'm sorry, Councilmember Marcano, I just have a question, a follow-up question to what Carly said. When you were talking about the additional speeds, well, the crossings and how you add additional timing, I guess my question for you on that, when do you evaluate those? And again, I'm giving an example where, Smoky Hill, over in Chambers. I've seen people, some people, I've seen some, older adults, people who are trying to get across there and, the cars are just ready to go. When do you evaluate, what are the timeframes that you evaluate those? Are those like within do you do it yearly? Do you how do you evaluate that? Because traffic is very different. It changes patterns, sometimes people take different ways. So the traffic patterns aren't always the same.
Yeah,
In any
that's a good
given
question.
time frame, any different month, as new people move to the city, people are like, hey, I'm going this way to cut through this way to do this way. So I guess I'm just asking about how do you do those major intersections like that with crosswalks?
Yeah, so signal timing in general, we do citywide efforts where we really look at the whole city, because sometimes we can't make big changes at intersections in a one-off way just because the ripple effects up and down, and since our cities really has a pretty solid arterial grid system, if you make a change here, you don't want to like push the problem somewhere else. So we normally do a citywide retiming where we just relook at everything every 8 or so years. But that's just looking at everything and seeing if we need to fundamentally change a lot of bigger metrics. In addition to that, we're constantly looking at corridor by corridor basis. So we might not change the overall cycle or some of the metrics, but we'll add time to phases. We might update pedestrian crossings if we've gotten a request and there's something that's changed or it's too short or something like that. So some examples, we recently retimed Quincy. So that area's had a lot of growth in the area, in that whole region, development, changes in traffic patterns. So we just retimed that a month or two ago, a couple months ago. We also recently retimed a lot of the signals in the Southeast Aurora area. And that's partially because we're working on a couple new signal plans and we've collected data and noticed there have been big changes. And then we also keep a database of resident requests, and we do use that to know like what signals need tweaking and adjusting, but we are looking at it corridor by corridor and not necessarily like doing citywide every year, because that would just not be possible.
Right.
But I do want to say that we're also Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I understand that, but with about 300 apartments coming to East Bank, I think you guys are gonna have to probably look at that evaluation of Smoky Hill and Chambers.
Yeah.
And just in general, and just in that grid area, because it's good, it's dense. And I can guarantee you, people are just not gonna be going to Parker Road. People are gonna be taking Smoky Hill, Chambers, Quincy, you know.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that as the development, as you're looking at development, especially with the amount of density that's gonna come, especially to that area and other areas in the city, that an evaluation can be done because, you know, just at that Smoky Hill and Chambers, they have bad car accidents. I
Mhm.
mean, the coffee shop across the street, they always have something in that area. I mean, they have some really bad accidents, just car accidents. So I can't even imagine if a pedestrian is there during some type of time frame when those accidents are occurring. So I hope that that's going to be in the pot or whatever you're programming. I understand you do it I'm not trying to say change every 8. You know, I know you have to look at 8 years, but as development is growing and you're having all this density in the area, the traffic patterns are going to be different because people are going to be taking different roads to get to different places.
You're
So
right. Yeah, we'll
yeah, so
definitely look at that. And we updated Parker and Quincy relatively recently, made some tweaks there. And then we actually also have a big grant funded project at Parker, Quincy, Smoky. So I'm sure you know about that. But it'll be totally retimed as part of that. But definitely when East Bank opens, we can re-look at that area. And the good thing is all the residents in Pierpoint have my contact info and they will let me know if they're having issues. But thank you for that question.
All right. Thank you all for the great conversation on this item. So I want to move us along to miscellaneous matters for consideration. Cindy, I believe you had something that you wanted to bring forward.
Yes, and actually I've got 2 things, and the first one I'm gonna bring to Lynn Center and bring her on board. As you know, we had some flooded out roads in Northeast Aurora. We have an opportunity to go for a grant, but it is a very quick time frame. We just found out about it. So Lynn is gonna provide you an update and a request to proceed with pursuing.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lynn Center. I'm the Deputy Director of Public Works in charge of operations. And I'm just going to take a quick few minutes to talk to you a little bit about some flooding we had on the Box Elder Creek that did some pretty decent damage to some of our roads out there. So the video is showing some of the water flow that was happening out there. Just give you an idea of where we are kind of in space, so to speak. We're talking about 56th Avenue between Hudson Road and Monahan Road, and Hudson Road between 26th Avenue and 56th Avenue. So that's just southeast of the Denver International Airport and just north of I-70 there, east of 470. So just give you an idea of some pictures. I'm going to start showing you some damage that happened on 56th Avenue. Most of the erosion that you're going to see is about 4 feet deep here on 56. And this is actually the better of the two.
Wow.
And then this is Hudson Road. And this is what it looked like when it was flooded. And I have another picture here when it was flooded. And then when the waters recede, this is what we had left. Again, we're looking at 4 feet of scour and destruction of roadway here.
That looks bombed out. Wow.
Yeah. A couple more pictures on Hudson Road. So as you might imagine, we have closed these roads to traffic. 56 is closed from Monahan to Hudson, and Hudson Road is closed from 26th to 56th Avenue. We expect those closures to be in place for at least the next 12 months, maybe longer. As far as recovery, we are still doing some damage assessment, but it looks preliminarily like obviously we're going to have to do some full-on roadway reconstruction out there. Right now, our estimates are looking at just under 6,000 square yards of pavement, and that's just pavement. We are working on estimates. We expect the totals to be in excess of $10 million to include drainage improvements and hardening, if you will, the roadway against future flooding, which brings us to the Protect grant. The Federal Emergency Management Agency has a PROTECT grant where it is, I believe it's 75-25% match, where they will fund improvements above and beyond to keep to prevent the whatever disaster it was from happening again, in this case a flood. So we are pursuing that grant. We've decided to apply. We hope it's okay. The deadline is August 18th, and we literally found out about it about 2 weeks ago. So we didn't really have time to pull together a full-on presentation for you all. But we hope that you would support us moving forward in applying for that grant. Cindy, anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think that's great. This is the way to fund the project. And the consultant that we're using has indicated that there's probably a pretty good chance of getting some type of funding. So we thought it'd be worth a shot.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you for that presentation. Councilmember Lawson, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I do have one question. So with this, right now everything is kind of hot, but we're about to start going into, I think maybe next week, where we might have like these, well, we had a little bit of rain here last night for sure, but every day we might get these storms. So how much more deterioration will occur with this if we have, will it just, and how are we going to, is there anything we can mitigate it from happening to get even worse?
It is difficult for us to tell that. What happened here was Box Elder actually jumped its banks.
Oh,
So it did not follow its planned flow path. So we couldn't see it coming because we expected it to follow its normal path, but it didn't. As far as mitigating more damage at this point, I don't know that there's very much out there that we can do. Anything we do has potential of becoming, a blockade or a projectile, if you will, a little bit further downstream. So we have the roads closed. Hopefully people are obeying the closure signs. We will address whatever further damage there is as we go through the design process. We expect to find more damage than we can see, because a lot of it is undercut and we can't see it. And we have really bad soils out here, and when they get really saturated, then really bad things happen. The roads start to move, like
Are we concerned about
a
sinkholes?
waterbed almost. Yeah.
Oh, yes, there could be sinkholes if there's more rain.
Yes.
But hopefully we've closed enough of the road that we've captured that area where that situation could occur. And if not, we'll go out and close additional if we need to.
We originally had 56 closed all the way out to Imboden and Hudson all the way up to 72nd, and we brought it back because we surveyed the roadway condition up there, and we felt it was safe to allow traffic on it.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Councilmember Lawson. Councilmember Medina.
Nothing at this point. Thank you.
All right. So I guess I have a couple questions here. Is this grant enough to cover the full cost of this project?
The grant would cover think of it like a betterment. So we would still need to fund the pavement restoration piece of it. But say we decided to put in a different pavement section design, the grant would fund the extra cost for that. If we decided to raise the roadway from its current elevation, the grant would pay for the fill or whatever would be needed to raise that roadway. The grant would pay for bridges, wood culverts, stream restoration, anything else that might protect the road from being flooded out again, the grant would pay for. But like the basic going out, putting the repavement back, that would be on us. And I'm not quite sure exactly how this grant works. That may end up being our match. I don't know.
Okay. And I guess my next question then is, have we talked to Adams County about this? As I was actually at the Adams County Council of Governments dinner last night that they had out in Bennett. And I know that this has impacted some of the unincorporated parts, and including Bennett and Watkins. Yeah, so is there any appetite there for them to help us out on this front if they're able to?
HDR is managing a lot of that engagement for us. We will be reaching out to them at least for letters of support for our grant, if nothing else. But they are reaching out to the stakeholders out there for us as part of gathering information for the grant.
Okay, thank you for that update. All right, so the ask is, would we support you all moving forward to apply for the grant, right?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Councilmember Medina and Lawson.
I support.
I support.
Great. So
Thank you.
it's unanimous. And then you had a second item for us, Cindy?
Yes, just real quick. I wanted to let everybody know that this is Steve Durian's last TAPS meeting with us.
Oh.
He has accepted a position in Boulder County as their Public Works Director. So certainly have enjoyed having him here. He's helped us make a lot of improvements around the development review side of the house here in Public Works with the reorganization and getting our metrics up to speed. So I wanted to let the committee know and also just, publicly thank Steve for everything that he's done.
Thank you, Stephen. Congratulations.
Thank you. I want to just thank Cindy and all of her staff for bringing me on board and all the support for the last several months. Thank you.
All right. Thanks again. And all right, with that, what are our anticipated topics for our next meeting?
All right, thanks, Chair Marcano. So we actually have several for August. We actually have 2 for August coming up. We have Carly coming back since she did such a great job today. We'll have her back next month. She's going to do the Dr. Cog Regional Traffic Operators Grant Application Update. So she'll give a brief summary of the applications we put in there for which grants and which projects. Lynn's going to do a presentation on snow removal by HOA and special districts. So we'll talk. I know it's not snowing right now, and doesn't feel like it will be anytime soon, but winter's coming. So we'll talk about snow removal by HOAs next month as well. And then just real quick on some of the items looking ahead for September. A few of these items we were just talking during Carly's presentation. So bike lanes and overlay or striping bike lanes with overlay projects. That's an item that we'll discuss here coming up in September. And then local cross street sections is also an item we'll discuss in September as well, as far as what we can do or not do associated with modifying current cross section widths associated with controlling speeds on local residential streets. And then the third item for September is going to be the Colfax bus rapid transit construction IGA. So we actually have quite a bit coming up here in the next 2 months, but that's a quick summary of what the look ahead has on it right now.
And then we'll add the ward pre-presentation for you as well.
All right.
Yep.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And thank you, Carly, in advance.
No worries.
All right. Well, thank you all. So let's go ahead and confirm our next meeting. I'll put my calendar here. I think I've got us currently for September. Oh, wait, August. What am I talking about? September. I already feel like it's August. Oh gosh, where'd I go? Oh, it's not on the calendar yet.
Oh.
What is our usual date here?
Should be
Would that
the
on the 31st or the 24th?
20.
I saw it in eScribe as the 24th since I'm already adding stuff.
All right, great.
If that
Yeah,
works
so
for you guys.
Thank you. Would the Thursday the 24th at 1 p.m. work for everybody?
That'll work for me.
All right, great. So I will see you all then again. Thanks and enjoy the rest of your day and have a great
Bye.
weekend.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.